Chapter 1 Exposition. I was 23, a junior at Boise State, studying environmental science because it felt like something I could stand behind without too many questions. My name's Ethan Carter, and I grew up in the flat, quiet suburbs of Boise, Idaho, where the streets are wide and the sky feels wider. If you saw me walking to class, you'd probably miss me: brown hair that's always a little too long, faded jeans, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. I wasn't loud or memorable, just another guy blending into the campus crowd. My days were split between lectures, late-night study sessions at the library, and shifts at a small coffee shop downtown called The Grind. It was the kind of place with mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and a faint smell of roasted beans that clung to your clothes. My best friend, Lucas, worked there too. He was the opposite of me, tall, all sharp angles and quick laughs, always ready with a story or a bad joke to pull me out of my head. We'd known each other since high school, bonded over a shared love of hiking and a mutual hatred of calculus. Lucas lived in a rented house just off campus, a squat one-story with peeling paint and a backyard that backed up to the Boise River. Most weekends, I'd end up there, sprawled on his couch, splitting a six-pack and arguing about music or the latest sci-fi flick. It was easy, predictable, the kind of routine you don't think twice about. That's how it was until I met Clara. Chapter 2 Inciting Incident. It was a crisp October afternoon in 2012, the kind where the air smells like fallen leaves and the sun cuts through the chill just enough to keep you from shivering. Lucas had dragged me to his place to study for a midterm, though we both knew we'd end up distracted within an hour. His house was a mess, books on the floor, dishes in the sink, but it felt alive, like a place where things happened. I was halfway through a sentence about carbon cycles when the front door opened. No knock, just the creak of hinges and a shadow crossing the living room. Clara walked in, carrying a canvas tote bag and a stack of mail. She was Lucas's older sister, 38, home from a shift at the public library where she worked as a reference librarian. I'd heard about her before. Lucas mentioned her in passing, usually with a grin and some story about her lecturing him on organization, but I'd never met her. She was tall, maybe an inch taller than me, with short chestnut hair tucked behind one ear and glasses that caught the light. Her presence was quiet but undeniable, like she didn't need to announce herself to be noticed. "Ethan, right?" she said, setting the mail on the counter. Her voice was low, steady, with a trace of warmth that didn't feel forced. I nodded, suddenly aware of how I was slouched on the couch. "Yeah, that's me." She smiled, just a flicker, and said, "Lucas says you're the one keeping him from failing. Good luck with that." Lucas laughed from the kitchen, tossing a bottle cap at me. I caught it, grinned, but my eyes stayed on her a second too long. She noticed, didn't say anything, just turned to the fridge and pulled out a pitcher of iced tea. Chapter 3 Rising Action. After that, Clara became a constant in the background of Lucas's house. She was always there, not in an intrusive way, but like a quiet rhythm you start to notice. I'd show up to study, and she'd be at the dining table, sorting through library paperwork or reading a novel with a cracked spine. Sometimes she'd join our conversations, her comments sharp and dry, cutting through Lucas's endless tangents. Other times, she'd just listen, her eyes flicking up from her book to meet mine for a moment before returning to the page. I started noticing things about her: the way she'd hum softly when she thought no one was listening, the way her fingers traced the edge of her coffee mug when she was deep in thought. One evening, Lucas was late getting back from a group project, and I found myself alone with her in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables, the knife moving with a practiced ease. "You cook a lot?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She glanced at me, a half-smile tugging at her lips. "Enough to keep Lucas from living on ramen." "You?" I shrugged. "I can make a mean sandwich." She laughed, soft and real, and handed me a knife. "Prove it. Dice these." I took it, our fingers brushing for a split second. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my pulse jump. We worked in silence for a while, the only sound the clink of the knife against the cutting board and the faint hum of a radio in the corner. When Lucas got home, we ate, and I tried not to notice how her knee brushed mine under the table. Chapter 4, Rising Action. The visits became more frequent, not because Lucas asked, but because I found reasons to show up. I'd bring a textbook, say I needed to borrow a charger, or just claim I was in the neighborhood. Lucas never questioned it. He was too busy with his own life, juggling classes and a new girlfriend who kept him out late. Clara, though, seemed to notice. She'd greet me with a raised eyebrow or a quiet, "Back already," but there was no edge to it, just a knowing look that made my stomach twist. One night, after Lucas had crashed early, she offered me a beer and gestured to the backyard. We sat on the deck, the river glinting under the moonlight, the air cool enough to make you pull your jacket tighter. "You don't strike me as the type who just hangs out," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. I looked at her, the glow from the porch light catching the curve of her jaw. "What type do I strike you as?" She tilted her head, studying me. "The type who thinks too much." I laughed, caught off guard, and she smiled, her eyes steady on mine. We talked for hours that night, about books, about the mountains outside Boise, about how she'd wanted to be an artist before life pushed her toward stability. Her words were careful, deliberate, but her gaze was unguarded, and I felt it pull me in, like gravity I didn't want to fight. Chapter 5, Rising Action. By November, the line between casual and something else had blurred. I'd catch myself watching her when she wasn't looking, how she'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, how her laugh was low and unhurried. She started leaving things for me, a book on ecology she thought I'd like, a playlist scrawled on a napkin, a thermos of coffee when she knew I'd been up late studying. Each gesture was small, easy to dismiss as nothing, but they stacked up, heavy with meaning. One afternoon, I stopped by to return the book. Lucas was out, and the house was quiet, just the soft patter of rain against the windows. Clara was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a sketch pad. "You draw?" I asked, surprised. She shrugged, closing the pad. "Used to. Just doodling now." I sat across from her, the air between us thick with something unspoken. "Can I see?" I asked. She hesitated, then handed it over. The sketches were simple: trees, riverbanks, a rough outline of a face I couldn't quite place. "They're good," I said, meaning it. She looked at me, her expression soft but unreadable. "You're too easy to please, Ethan." Her voice was quiet, but it landed like a touch. I handed the pad back, our fingers brushing again, and this time neither of us pulled away. Chapter 6, Climax. It was a Friday in early December, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Lucas was gone for the weekend, visiting his dad in Seattle. I told myself I was just dropping off a scarf Clara had left at the coffee shop, but when I knocked, she opened the door with a look that said she'd been expecting me. "You didn't have to come all the way out here," she said, but her smile was warm, inviting me in. The house smelled like cedar and cinnamon, a candle flickering on the counter. We talked over coffee, then wine, sitting closer than we needed to on the couch. The conversation drifted: her job, my classes, the way Boise felt smaller every year. Then, in a pause, she looked at me, her eyes steady, searching. "Why do you keep coming back, Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could have dodged it, made a joke, but I didn't. "Because I don't want to be anywhere else," I said. The words hung there, raw and true. She didn't look away, didn't laugh it off. Instead, she reached out, her hand resting lightly on mine. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and when I leaned in, she met me halfway. The kiss was soft, hesitant, then sure, like something we'd both been waiting for. When we pulled back, her eyes were bright, unguarded, and I knew nothing would be the same. Chapter 7, Falling Action. After that night, we didn't pretend it hadn't happened. There were no grand declarations, no promises, just a quiet understanding that grew in the spaces between words. I'd come over when Lucas wasn't home, and we'd cook together, watch old movies, or sit on the deck with blankets when the nights turned cold. Her touch was careful but deliberate, a hand on my arm, a brush of her shoulder against mine. We didn't talk about what it was, but it was there, real and unspoken. Lucas started to notice, though. He'd make offhand comments, how I was at the house too much, how Clara seemed different. "You guys are weirdly close now," he said once, half laughing, half serious. I deflected, but the weight of his words lingered. Clara felt it too. One night, as we sat on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder, she said, "We're not doing anything wrong, are we?" I wanted to say no, but the question stuck in my throat. Instead, I squeezed her hand, and she leaned closer, her breath warm against my neck. Chapter 8, Falling Action. The secrecy became its own kind of pressure. I'd catch Clara watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression caught between warmth and worry. We were careful, no texts, no calls, nothing that could be traced. But Boise's a small city, and eyes are everywhere. A neighbor saw me leaving her house late one night and gave me a long, curious look. A co-worker at the library asked Clara about the young guy she'd seen me with. We laughed it off, but it was a reminder of the line we were walking. One evening, I asked her, "What happens if Lucas finds out?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at the river through the kitchen window. "He'll be hurt," she said finally. "But he'll get over it. I hope." Her voice was steady, but her hand tightened around her mug. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt was there, growing louder with every visit. Chapter 9, Falling Action. By February, the routine had settled, but it wasn't comfortable anymore. I loved the way Clara made me feel, seen, understood, like I was more than just a kid drifting through college. But the guilt was heavier now, not just about Lucas but about what we were risking. One night, after dinner, I stayed late, helping her clean the kitchen. We stood at the sink, her washing, me drying, our movements synchronized like we'd done it 100 times. "Do you ever think about stopping?" I asked, my voice low. She paused, a plate dripping in her hands. "Do you?" she countered. I didn't answer, because the truth was I couldn't imagine it, but I also couldn't ignore the cost. She set the plate down, turned to me, and kissed me, slow and deliberate, like she was answering the question for both of us. But when I left that night, I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, wondering how much longer we could keep this up. Chapter 10, Resolution. Spring came, and with it, a kind of clarity. Lucas confronted me one afternoon at the grind, his voice low but sharp. "You're at my house all the time, man. What's going on with you and Clara?" I froze, my hands still on the espresso machine. I could have lied, but I didn't. "We're close," I said, hating how vague it sounded. He stared at me, his jaw tight, then walked out without another word. That night, I went to Clara's. She was waiting, her face pale but calm. "He knows," she said simply. We sat on the deck, the river rushing in the dark, and talked about what came next. No promises, no plans, just the truth. We cared about each other, but we couldn't keep hiding. "I don't regret it," she said, her hand finding mine. "Neither do I," said, and meant it. We decided to tell Lucas together, to face whatever came. It wouldn't be easy, anger, maybe distance, maybe worse. But as I looked at her, the Boise sky stretching endless above us, I felt something settle. Not guilt, not fear, but a quiet certainty that whatever happened, we'd been real, and that was enough. The story of Ethan Carter and Clara in Whispers of Boise is a delicate tapestry woven from quiet moments, unspoken desires, and the weight of choices made in the spaces between words. Set against the understated backdrop of Boise, Idaho, in 2012, it captures the essence of a forbidden connection that unfolds not in grand gestures but in the subtle interplay of glances, touches, and silences. This conclusion explores the narrative's stylistic fidelity to the original text, its adherence to the classical narrative arc, the depth of its characters, the thematic resonance, and the cultural context that grounds it, while reflecting on its emotional and philosophical implications. Stylistic alignment with the original text. The story mirrors the original text's introspective, cinematic An emotionally restrained style with precision. The first-person perspective, through Ethan's eyes, creates an immediate intimacy, allowing readers to inhabit his thoughts, doubts, and quiet revelations. Like the original, the narrative prioritizes sensory details, the smell of cedar, the glint of the Boise River under moonlight, the soft patter of rain, to build a world that feels tangible and lived in. These details are not mere decoration but anchors that ground the emotional stakes, much like the original's focus on the citrusy scent of tea or the creased spine of a book. The language remains simple yet evocative, avoiding florid prose in favor of a directness that reflects Ethan's self-described ordinariness while revealing a deeper sensitivity beneath. The dialogue, sparse but purposeful, carries the same weight as in the original. Clara's lines, like, "You're too easy to please, Ethan," or, "Why do you keep coming back," are understated yet loaded with subtext, echoing the original's use of minimal dialogue to convey complex emotions. The rhythm of the prose, with its mix of short, clipped sentences and longer, reflective passages, mirrors the original's internal monologue style, capturing Ethan's oscillation between certainty and doubt. The narrative's refusal to over-explain, leaving moments like the kiss in Chapter 6 or the final conversation in Chapter 10 undefined, preserves the original's reliance on nedoskazanost, or unsaidness, inviting readers to fill in the gaps with their own interpretations. The story's cinematic quality is evident in its vivid scene setting and pacing. Each chapter unfolds like a scene in a quiet indie film, with careful attention to light, sound, and movement. For instance, the description of Clara's sketchpad in Chapter 5 or the candlelit kitchen in Chapter 6 evokes a visual clarity that feels almost frame by frame. This aligns with the original's ability to make mundane settings, a kitchen, a patio, feel charged with meaning. The pacing, slow and deliberate, allows the relationship to build organically, avoiding melodrama in favor of a gradual accumulation of moments, much like the original's focus on small stuff, barely their moments, that stack up. Narrative structure. The classical arc. The story adheres to the classical narrative arc: exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, while maintaining the original's emphasis on emotional rather than plot-driven progression. Chapter 1 establishes Ethan's world with a clear sense of place, Boise, and character, a reserved student with a predictable routine, setting the stage for disruption. The inciting incident in Chapter 2, Clara's entrance, introduces the catalyst for change, her presence immediately shifting Ethan's perspective. The rising action, Chapters 3 to 5, builds tension through incremental interactions, shared meals, lingering glances, small gestures like the book or playlist, that deepen their connection while hinting at the complications of their age gap and social ties. The climax in Chapter 6, marked by the kiss, is the emotional pivot, crystallizing their mutual acknowledgement of something deeper. It's handled with the same restraint as the original, avoiding overt passion for a moment that feels inevitable yet fragile. The falling action, Chapters 7 to 9, explores the consequences of this shift, introducing secrecy, guilt, and external pressures, Lucas's suspicions, neighbors' glances. The resolution in Chapter 10, where Ethan and Clara decide to confront Lucas, offers closure without finality, echoing the original's refusal to neatly resolve the emotional complexity. This structure ensures a satisfying arc while preserving the introspective focus, allowing the story to feel both complete and open-ended, much like the original's conclusion that, maybe we'll break apart, maybe we won't. Character development. Ethan and Clara are the heart of the story, their development driven by their evolving relationship and internal conflicts. Ethan, like the original's Ryan, is an everyman, unassuming, introspective, and caught between youth and the weight of adult choices. His arc is one of self-discovery, moving from a passive participant in his own life to someone who acknowledges his desires, even at the risk of losing his best friend. His voice, self-deprecating yet observant, mirrors Ryan's, with lines like, "I wasn't loud or memorable," establishing his ordinariness while his reflections on Clara reveal a growing emotional maturity. His struggle with guilt, particularly in Chapter 9, where he questions stopping, adds depth, showing a young man grappling with the moral implications of his feelings. Clara, like the original's Marissa, is a figure of quiet strength and complexity. Her artistic past, revealed in Chapter 4, and her current role as a librarian ground her in a life of unfulfilled dreams tempered by pragmatism. Her interactions with Ethan, sharp-witted yet warm, suggest a woman who is both confident and vulnerable, seeking connection but aware of its risks. Her sketches, her careful gestures, and her willingness to confront the truth in Chapter 10 paint her as someone who values authenticity over convenience. Unlike a stereotypical older woman in such narratives, Clara is neither predatory nor maternal. She's a fully realized individual, her age gap with Ethan a source of tension but not caricature. Lucas, though secondary, serves as a crucial anchor, much like Aaron in the original. His boisterous presence contrasts with Ethan's reserve, providing a foil that highlights Ethan's introspection. His growing suspicion adds stakes, making the relationship's secrecy feel precarious. His confrontation in Chapter 10 is understated but impactful, avoiding melodrama while underscoring the cost of Ethan and Clara's choices. The minor characters, neighbors, co-workers, function similarly to the original's peripheral figures, their brief appearances amplifying the sense of a small, watchful community. Thematic resonance. The story explores themes of forbidden love, personal authenticity, and the tension between desire and duty, echoing the original's emotional core. The relationship between Ethan and Clara is not just about attraction but about being seen. Ethan's sense of being more than just a kid mirrors Ryan's feeling of being seen by Marissa. Their connection challenges social norms, particularly around age and familial roles, but the narrative avoids judgment, presenting it as not wrong, just different, much like the original stance. This ambiguity invites readers to question societal expectations without forcing a moral stance. The theme of secrecy permeates the story, reflected in the careful avoidance of texts or calls and the subtle glances that carry more weight than words. This mirrors the original's focus on unspoken understanding, where moments like a brush of hands or a shared book speak louder than declarations. The guilt and doubt that surface in the falling action highlight the cost of living authentically in a world that demands conformity, a universal struggle framed here in a personal context. Boise itself becomes a thematic element, its small-town intimacy amplifying the stakes of Ethan and Clara's relationship. Unlike a bustling city, Boise's quiet streets and close-knit neighborhoods make secrecy both necessary and fragile, much like the Sacramento suburbs in the original. The Boise River, recurring throughout, serves as a symbol of flow and inevitability, reflecting the unstoppable pull of their connection.